want to welcome you to the Bible study To Know Christ. I'm Jeff Pedersen, the pastor of the Lutheran Church of Peace in Platteville, Wisconsin. Thank you for joining me as we continue our study on the nations of the Bible. And so as we think about the nations of the Bible, we always focus in on the nation of Israel, because that was God's people. God called Abraham and Sarah that they would be the parents of this great nation, that God would bless them with many descendants, bless them with a land, and also bless them with a blessing that they will be able to bless all the nations of the world with, and of course that blessing being Jesus Christ. And so as interesting as it is to study God's people, Israel, it's also interesting as far as learning about some of the other nations that we hear about in the Bible. These would be the neighbors to Israel. A few weeks ago, we studied the nation of Edom. A couple weeks ago, we studied the nation of Moab. Last week, we studied the nation of Ammon. Well, today now, we are studying the nation of Philistia, which is the nation of the Philistines. And so as we think about the Philistines, this nation was in the southwest corner of where Israel was. It was right on the coastal plain of the Mediterranean Sea. Today, if we were to go there, it would be the Gaza Strip. And so that's where we are going to be focusing in on today. So as we think about the Philistines, as we read about them in the Bible, we always think of them as being such a powerful nation. As they would interact with God's people, Israel, it seems like they were always interacting in war. They were always going to battle. And so as we think of the Philistines, they were just a powerful nation. And so as I try to think about this in my own life, trying to get a perspective, what always reminds me of is that when I was younger, I was playing high school sports. And so our school was part of a conference of many other schools. And I always remember that there would be a town that had their school, and they were always perennial winners. More often than not, they would be, for instance, conference champs in football. They just had a program where they had a way of winning. And they would be very hard to beat. So to be able to beat this team was really quite an accomplishment, is that because they would be generally conference champions. And so as I think about the Philistines, I always think of them as being kind of the conference champions. It seems like no matter who would go to battle against them, somehow the Philistines always were on top. So who can dethrone the Philistines? And so we hear time and time again where God's people would be going up against the Philistines. And more often than not, they were defeated. Even Joshua, he was the great commander. He was the leader of God's people after Moses. And so after Moses, it was Joshua that led God's people into the promised land. He is the one who led the conquest. And so as you think about the Holy Land, the promised land, the land of Israel, is that there were so many cities and so many regions that they had to conquer. And every one of these cities it was like a city-state. They all had their own government. They all had their wall around the city for protection. Every one of these cities had their own army. So it was really quite an arduous event to conquer the promised land, because you defeat one city, like Jericho, thinking, wow, they defeated the city of Jericho. What an awesome defeat. And, we've heard the story about Jericho, and the walls come tumbling down. And what a defeat that was. But we have to remember that that was the first city that they conquered. The first city of many. The second city was the city of Ai, spelled A-I. They were able to defeat them, thinking, wow, they were able to defeat the city of Ai. But here again, this was just 2 cities of so many that they had to conquer. So by the time that Joshua was getting old and the army was getting worn out, that there were some areas that it was hard for the Israelites to be able to subdue and to conquer as being part of their land, that then they divided up into different regions so that every tribe of Israel would have their region of land that they could live in. And so the Philistine region was a region that was very hard for them to conquer, very hard for them to subdue. And it really wasn't until David became king that they were really able to finally defeat the Philistines and to bring that region into the nation of Israel. But we hear of popular stories. As we think of the Philistines, we hear about popular stories that are hopefully familiar to us. One of these stories would be Samson. As we think about the judges of Israel, it seems like the judges of Israel, each one of them had to go, fought against a region or a group of people. And so when we study about Samson, who was it that he had to fight against? The Philistines. And so Samson was this big, strong guy. And when we think of some of the stories about Samson, they're legendary. They are lore of how he would be able to take a big door to the gate of a city and just rip it off, or how he was able to take wild animals and like bear and lion and be able to kill them with his bare hands, and the thousands of soldiers that he was able to defeat. But anyway, the thing about Samson is that he was a Nazirite. And a Nazirite, they were a sect of God's people, a very special sect, where they would take a vow to be a Nazirite. And the vow to be a Nazirite was basically threefold, is that you were not allowed to drink any wine, like alcoholic beverages. You were not allowed to touch any dead corpse, not even an animal's corpse. And you were not to cut your hair. Those 3 things. Now, the problem with Samson is that he became so strong and so powerful in so many ways, is that it got to his head. He became arrogant. And the sad thing, what was so unfortunate about this, is that he ended up breaking every one of these vows. And that's the thing, is that sometimes we can become so arrogant. And what brings on our arrogance? Well, I don't know. Maybe there's a stretch in our life where we are, I guess in our minds or in other people's minds, successful, powerful, popular. I think we know of examples of people where they start off with all these good intentions and doing well, and then they become very popular, and somehow all the success, gets to them, and things happen where they begin to tumble down. We see this happen a lot, in society with people, and we probably can even see where it happens maybe in our own life, maybe to lesser degrees. But as soon as we get arrogant, and when our head begins to swell and grow, it doesn't take long, before something can pop it. And so that's what was happening with Samson, is that part of his problem is that as he was fighting with the Philistines, is that he would fall in love with Philistine women. We hear of Delilah. And so as he would fall asleep, or as he would fall in love, and he's with these Philistine women, he was sleeping with the enemy. And that's where Delilah was able to, with a few attempts, be able to devise a plan where she was able to figure out how Samson got his strength, and that was his downfall. And so with the powers comes the arrogance, but with the arrogance, that's when we fall. Because no matter how strong we think we are, we're not all that strong, especially in relationship with God. That God can bring us to our knees so quickly. It doesn't take very long at all. And so it's the thing, is that you can have a poisonous snake as a pet. You can say, oh, I get along so well with this poisonous snake. But all at once, without really any warning, unexpectedly, that snake will strike. And that's what arrogance does to us. Just when we think that our arrogance is just like a pet snake that we can get along with so well, and it's so much fun that it can strike us down so fast. I think about the principle of -1. As I studied psychology, it was the principle of -1. Maybe I've shared this with you somewhere along the line, or maybe you've heard it, but I think you're going to be able to relate. -1. What this means is that you can be doing so well. You can be doing so many good things. And you can gain the respect of everybody in your community. And because of all the good that you've been doing, that you are now, you've kind of went right up in a sense, the corporate ladder to where now you're in this high position. And you're doing a great job in this position. Everybody loves you in this position. And just when you think that, things are as good as they can get, you get arrogant and you do something to where you slip up. And when you slip up, that's a negative. And that one, and that's why I say -1. Like when you do multiplication, if you take 3 times -1, you get -3. If you take -1 times 10, you multiply it by 10, you get -10. If you take 100 and multiply it by -1, you get -100. You see that -1 will make whatever number you're multiplying it with to be a negative number now. And so what the principle of -1 is that you can do all kinds of good things. It doesn't matter how many good things you've done, whether it be 1 good thing or 10 good things, 100 good things, 1,000 good things. But as soon as you have that -1 event, when you've done that bad thing, when you have slipped up, it negates everything that you've done. Everything now is a negative. And with that negative, you will not be able to overcome it. And that's the sad thing. Is that even though people are saying, but this person did so much good and we got to remember the good, but the -1, really it does ruin everything. I've seen so many people in so many different kinds of positions, good positions where they've done so much good. But they have that one negative thing happen and they're gone. They're done. I remember this one man who really was successful, and he really did a lot of good things. Not only a good thing in his business, but also good in the community, and on and on and on. Well, he had his one slip up, and his board of directors came in and said, "Did this happen?" And he said, "Yes." And they said, "Well, you've got 1 hour to clean your desk, and we're going to stand here as you do it." That's the principle of -1. And we can see, and here again, I don't need to give you examples because you know all the examples. You know what I'm talking about. And that's what happens to Samson. But what is special about our Lord is that Jesus he dies on a cross. And we have to remember that the cross is the plus sign. And that he redeems us. And that he wants to reverse this whole principle of -1 to say that, yes, we've had all these minuses, we've had all these minuses that have happened in our lives, but because of Jesus Christ. He can take the minuses of our life, and he's the only one that can do it, and turn them into pluses. He's the one who can redeem our lives. He's the one who can take even the bad situations of our life, and he can make something good happen out of them. And so that's the thing about Samson, is that in the end, God was able to redeem him. God was able to finally bring the purpose that he had for him in bringing a defeat to the Philistines. But then I think of another time where the Philistines were being pretty arrogant. Here again, when you're conference champs, year after year after year, you just have your way with everybody. Where you're able to finally say, you know what? We walk around humble, even though we're good. But once in a while, we just like to flex our muscles, just to remind everybody who is number one. And so that's the way the Philistines were after a while, just saying, ha, we are the Philistines. And we can do whatever we want. We can have our way with other nations. We can have our way with other people. If we want to walk all over them, we can just walk all over them. Sounds like human arrogance, doesn't it? How many people do we know just saying, well, I'm so-and-so, and I can just walk over everybody, and they do. And a lot of times there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. But that's the way the Philistines were. Is that one day, they went into battle with God's people, and you know what they did? They captured and they stole the Ark of the Covenant, which was the most precious thing, the most valuable thing to the Israelites. The Ark of the Covenant. That was the presence of God in their midst. If there was anything that they protected above all other things, it was the Ark of the Covenant. We can lose everything, but don't lose the Ark. Because to lose the Ark means that God's presence isn't with us anymore. We are now, in a sense, God-forsaken. So the Philistines just kind of went in, flexing their muscles, all as arrogant as it can be, went in, stole the Ark of the Covenant, brought it back to their nation. Philistia. You notice I've been saying the Philistine people because I have a hard time pronouncing it. Oh well, maybe there's some words that you have a hard time pronouncing, kind of tongue twisters. Okay, so the land of the Philistines. They brought it back to their land. And as they had that, they're saying, wow, boy, look we got their national treasure. Isn't that something? We could just walk right in underneath their noses and take it, and there was nothing that they could do about it. But you have to remember, though, that God is God. And so what does God do to the Philistines? He starts to send plagues upon them where God was making the people sick. They were getting these tumors. Their false god, Dagon, fell over. And finally the Philistine people are, here again, the most powerful, conference champs, but they're starting to realize we're dealing with a power that is beyond us here. This isn't any worldly power. This is a God. And finally they thought, we don't want to mess with this God of Israel anymore. And so what they did is that they took they brought the Ark of the Covenant back with some peace offerings. Because they didn't want to deal with God anymore. In other words, we don't mess with God. As a human being, as a mortal, we can walk around with our noses up, and we can walk around with a strut, and we can walk all over everybody, but you know what? You don't mess with God. God will knock us off of our pedestal pretty quick. I remember going to Jerusalem one day. I was in Jerusalem. And I went to the Wailing Wall, and that's what remains of the Temple Mount. And you know how it is when people go to a land like the Holy Land, they're probably thinking, oh, I want to come back with a great souvenir. And so you go to different souvenir stands, hoping to find just that one thing. Well, you know what? As I was going over to Israel, you know what I wanted? You know what my big souvenir was going to be? I wanted just a little piece of the Wailing Wall. Like just a little stone. And so when I got down to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, I looked, this wall is huge. And the blocks to this wall, they are big and they are solid. And so I just started thinking, well, how am I going to get a piece of the Wailing Wall when it is solid? It's not like I could find a chisel and a hammer and start hammering away and get a little chunk out of it. I would be arrested immediately. But I must say that I'm a persistent person. I just won't be denied. Even though I was looking thinking, oh, these solid blocks here, how am I ever going to get a piece of the Wailing Wall? And why did I want a piece of the Wailing Wall? Because, I've studied the Bible, my whole life. And I thought, oh, it'd be so neat to have this little piece of the Wailing Wall that I could show students in confirmation classes or at Bible study. I could show people to say, you know what, we're studying, here's a piece of it. Or just have it in my office as people come in. It could be a good conversation piece. So as I was not going to be denied, I just started looking, and I looked up a little ways, and I could see this crack in one of these big blocks. And in the crack, I could see this little piece of it, this little stone that looked like it was loose. And so I thought, well, how am I going to go up there and reach it? Well, here again, I'm not going to be denied. There are so many people who are there praying, and you look at the Orthodox Jews, they're praying at the Wailing Wall, and some of them that are older would be sitting on a metal chair as they'd be praying. And so, wouldn't you know, I saw a metal chair that wasn't being used. And so I took it over by where that crack was. And then people, they will write prayers and they'll roll them up and they will put them into the cracks or in the little holes of the Wailing Wall. And so I pretended like I was putting a prayer. So I go and I stand in this metal chair. And then I'm pretending like I'm putting a prayer in this crack. And so as I'm doing that, I grab this little loose piece of the Wailing Wall. I grab it and I put it in my pocket. And just like that, success. And it was just perfect. It was about that size. And so I left there thinking, oh, great, I got my souvenir. But I'll tell you what, call it weak in conscience or whatever. But my conscience was haunted. You would not believe how guilty, how guilt-ridden I was feeling. I couldn't figure it out. Why? Why am I feeling so guilty? All it is a stone. It's not God. It's not something that we worship. What's the big deal? But after a few days, it was still just haunting my conscience terribly. I kept thinking, well, maybe after a few nights of sleeping on it, I'll finally get over it. But after a few nights, I just thought, this reminds me of the whole thing with the Philistines, taking the Ark of the Covenant. God is saying, you're not going to take that, and so put it back. And so wouldn't you know, I walked back down there, and I got the metal chair, and I put it back up in there. And then my conscience was freed. But here again, you don't mess with God. And then I think of another Philistine story, and that would be David fighting the great Philistine warrior Goliath. Goliath, who was 6 cubits tall, meaning that he's 9 feet tall. And he was the great warrior, the most feared, but nobody would be willing to go down into the valley of Elah to fight him. And so it was David who was. And he comes out there, he didn't have a sword and he didn't have armor, but he came out with his sling and a stone. And with his sling and with his stone, he was able to slay the great giant Goliath that represented, here again, the power of the people, the power of the army. And David was able to bring defeat to Goliath and to the Philistines that day. And he was able to subdue this nation, bring them under Israel's control. But we think about our Goliath being sin, death, and the power of the devil. And who is our David? Who is our shepherd that goes and fights for us? It is Jesus Christ. His weapon being a cross. The cross for which Jesus dies on. He dies for our sins, and he's risen from the dead that we may have life in him. And I think about the words from Romans chapter 8, verse 37. We are more than conquerors through him who loved us, that in Jesus Christ we have the victory. Well, thank you for joining me. Join me again next week as we continue our study to know Christ.
Coming to our area, Rebecca St. James.
Comes in the morning, the sun is rising, and I wait for you.
Grammy Award winner Rebecca St. James, Sunday, October 30th at 6:30. Also appearing for King and Country and singer Danon Kane.
Inheritance is ours. Yeah, 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 yeah.
I am waiting for you, darling. Wait for me till
Ticket sales begin September 30th through the UW Platteville Center for the Arts box office. Call 608-342-1298. On behalf of the Lutheran Church of Peace, I'm Robert Snyder. Thank you for watching our program, and please join us again for To Know Christ.